Thanks everybody for being here today. Casey, Janice, and I are so excited to share with you our approach to engaging stakeholders on your web projects. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. We're going to go video off. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. So we are rolling. Awesome. Before we get started, we'd like to hear a little bit about you all. So we're going to throw up a couple of polls. First, what brought you here today? Are you planning a digital project? Is that why you're thinking about how to engage stakeholders? And if so, have you already identified your stakeholder groups? So go ahead and just throw some answers up there so that we understand where you are in the world of planning your projects. All right, great. Thank you so much, Jenna, for your help there. Awesome. Love to hear that. So it looks like a lot of you are planning a project and you have figured out who your stakeholder groups are. That's wonderful. So I hope today that when we show you how to identify and plan for your stakeholders, that you might learn something a little bit more about uncovering even more stakeholders that might be in your universe. But if not, there's always the ending of how to engage them and the tactics and how to do that. So I'm sure that you're going to get a ton out of our talk today. So thanks so much for participating there. Let's start. All right. So why stakeholders matter. Simply put, exclusion is not an option. So engaging stakeholders is critical to the successful delivery and adoption of your website project. Pure, plain, and simple. There's often a false confidence on a project's core team that they know exactly what should be included in a web redesign. Unless these wishes and requests, though, are backed by previously done user research, you cannot say for certain that those features are what your users need. There may be reticence to include stakeholders for fear of slowing down the process or dealing with hurdles of building consensus. Those risks are both manageable and worth it. As confident as the core teams may feel, they may not be your end users. And so without gathering input from them, you risk critical pieces of the project. First and foremost, you want people to use the new site. And if it doesn't meet their needs, they simply won't. This goes for back-end content editors or front-end end users, consumers, members, patrons, supporters, students, whomever you're looking to have engaged with your site. If you don't understand what they need, you risk having to do rework and running up the budget. You want to avoid sunk costs in the original project because you didn't listen or validate that the product meets needs. Accessibility is an important topic that we need to address as well. Ensuring that everybody can access and consume information on your site is not only a moral obligation, but sometimes a legal one too. If you launch a product that doesn't meet your end users' needs, there's a real risk to your brand's perception and trust. Humans hate being left out or not considered, and they will rebuff brands that don't appear to be inclusive or thoughtful. So Atten partnered with the city of Raleigh, North Carolina to redesign their website. The website was just one piece of a large citywide rebrand, but a critical one. We launched their website successfully, and we manage continuous innovation sprints with them today. A city probably has one of the largest stakeholder groups that you could imagine: city staff and departments, residents, business owners, students, and tourists. During the initial redesign, we spent a lot of time upfront identifying key stakeholder individuals and groups and mapping out a thoughtful stakeholder engagement plan, the result of which was a 94% adoption in week 1. So I'll tell you here that we left the old site up intentionally for 4 weeks, as we also launched the new site to make sure that people had enough time to get used to the new experience before sunsetting the old one. But that didn't even matter because we had done such a good job of engaging folks ahead of time and preparing them for this site launch that 94% of users used the new site after 1 week. That's because the site listened to them and it provided innovations that met their needs better than the old one. I'm going to hand it off to Casey now to talk about step 1 in the process.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. In this section, we'll talk about the first step, which is identifying your stakeholders and their involvement throughout the life cycle of the project. Who qualifies as a stakeholder? The number one question. Anyone whose world may be affected by your project should be considered a stakeholder. Someone who simply needs to be FYI'd deserves a space in your stakeholder engagement plan as much as your primary core project team and website users. For example, if you're building a new website for a university, we know that prospective students are a primary audience. But we also know that various departments want to keep their own objectives in mind. Think alumni groups. Each department and department staff should also be factored into your plan too. Perhaps they need to be trained to use the site themselves, or at the very least informed on when the new site experience will go live. If you're planning a project right now, or even if you aren't, imagine a project you might do down the line. Think about who would need to be involved, even passively. Here are some trigger words or thoughts for inspiration when you think of that list. Consider the individuals and groups that would use your product. Think about people that are internal to your organization that should be FYIs or alternatively involved in strategy, reviewing work, building, or maintaining the product. Think about the content of the site. What users are you trying to reach? Is the project going to be controversial? If so, to whom? You should plan to address detractors or negative influencers from the onset. Ensure you are playing devil's advocate for your team. Will you need to engage vendors or partners to participate in the project? If you are public facing, should the media be informed? There can be various mandates within your organization that may indicate what type of stakeholders you need to involve in the process. For example, public sector organizations are bound by 508 compliance, meaning that your site needs to be accessible to those using assistive technology. This can mean screen reader tests, keyboard tests, etc. Pharma and some other products are bound by regulatory and legal reviews, so you need to consider their needs and lead times as well. Do you or anyone else in your organization need to hand off the project for QA or security checks? Or do you need to run it by some important people before they'll okay your launch? Think about your toll gates and how long they will take and who those groups might be, and then add them to your list. Now that you have the universe of stakeholders assembled, reflect on why they are on this list. Is there one specific area they need to weigh in on, or do they need to be involved in all phases and deliverables? How much influence do they have over the project? When is an appropriate time to engage them? When might it be too late to include them? Meaning, is it smart to engage them sooner, or do they want to see a late stage product, or maybe even at repeated and periodic touch points? Now it's also a good time to start doing risk assessments. If you don't involve this person or group, what could go wrong? Last, you want to note down the best way to engage these specific stakeholders. Does this person require an in-person meeting, or will an email suffice? Is there a lead time to get on a city council or board meeting agenda? What are their expectations for you engaging them? List any of those known details that you have right now. In this next section, we'll show you how to use this information to plot out your stakeholder engagement plan, including RACI charts and project roadmaps.
Great, thank you, Casey. My name is Janice Camacho. I'm one of the senior project managers here at ATN. In this next section, we're going to talk about planning to engage your stakeholders using tools you're already maintaining for your project, as well as those specific for stakeholder management. Roadmaps are artifacts that we as project managers use and maintain throughout the entirety of our project. The first step in planning is to understand the overall project workflow, and having a roadmap for the project is necessary in order to be efficient and set your team up for success. Your project plan will give you a 10,000-foot view of the start to finish activity and will provide you with guardrails to manage people, approvals, resources, and risk. When developing a roadmap, you need to think about project requirements and how they deliver value and help your team complete the tasks. We'll use waterfall, agile, or a mix of both to conduct your user research, wireframes, UI design, or developing the code. Once you outline the workflow and the necessary deliverables, it's time to overlay the stakeholder engagement opportunities. Now that you have your project tasks, activities, or deliverables outlined, take a look at that stakeholder list and determine for which deliverables do individuals need to be responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed, or a RACI chart. A RACI chart will help you determine the right moments to engage your stakeholders and how. We recently developed a RACI chart for the Ames Community College website project to ensure we were accounting for the right stakeholder engagement, the required deliverables, and at the various stages of the project that they were required. What we did here was listed out the items on our to-do list and correlated those deliverables to the right teams based on how much or how little they needed to be engaged with that aspect of the project. This made certain that 1, we could circulate the deliverables to the right team member, and 2, that we could set the expectation for what sort of input they were to have based on the predefined list. It's also important to note that individuals can have variable responsibilities based on the deliverable. A communications director might be responsible for a content migration plan and only consulted on a redirect strategy, for example. A RACI chart enables the entire stakeholder team to have a clear understanding of where they fit in, ensuring there are no surprises and all teams are on the same page. Now you can go back and make adjustments to your project plan based on your defined and approved RACI chart. Think about what your stakeholders are thinking in terms of frequency and touch points. Will you engage them one time or ongoing? What sort of input will you require of them? Keep this in mind if you need to prepare them, schedule calendar time, or ensure they're engaged where they need to be. From there, work with your core team and use your RACI chart to identify where your stakeholders need to engage in the project. Does the RACI chart indicate that a stakeholder group needs to review wireframes? Mark that on your roadmap or proactively schedule those meetings. Do you want or need to vet wireframes with the end users? Create that space for testing. Do you need to share visual design comps with a secondary stakeholder group? Mark that as a to-do at the right spot in your schedule. Or do you have to include a mandatory legal review? Find out how long that might take. For example, we're currently working with a group that requires a 4-week window for a security scan. This is absolutely something you need and want to plan for. How you engage your stakeholders will be in the next section, but it's in this moment where you're pinpointing on your roadmap the specific stakeholder moments, when they should happen, and align with them on the greater groups, align with the greater groups to ensure expectations are clear. With that, I'm going to send it back over to Sally to kick off our last section on engagement of stakeholders.
So this is exciting. You've identified your stakeholders and you've mapped out where to engage them. So now let's talk about how. I'm sure you're excited to get ideas on how to engage your stakeholders, and we'll show you here ways to plan for pull and push communications. Before we go through an exhaustive list of tactics, though, it's probably prudent for us to first consider how your audience is most easily reached. How should you engage them? Do they already have expectations? What is their level of savviness? For example, is a fancy user testing platform or portal going to be off-putting to somebody who's a low information stakeholder? One key takeaway here is to meet them where they are and to deliver the message or ask the questions in a digestible way. Engaging people means inviting commentary. We understand that this may result in different people or groups wanting different things. Conflict is largely unavoidable on web projects. Hearing different perspectives, though, it's important for decision-making. You may be concerned about hearing conflicting messages or how to deal with detractors. We would suggest, including in your project roadmap, developing a set of project goals or measurable KPIs in addition to your RACI chart. So when you hear conflicting feedback between people or groups, your RACI chart or your project goals and KPIs can help you figure out which perspectives or opinions win, so to speak. The suggestion or feedback that supports your project goals or perspectives from primary, responsible, or accountable groups should be prioritized over ideas or requests that do not meet project goals or come from a low influence group.
Awesome. Thanks, Sally. So let's talk about some great tactics for listening to key stakeholders. These activities you can see listed on the slide are usually led by a user researcher or product owner, or even facilitated by a project manager. Atten's strategy team are Norman Nielsen certified usability experts with a wealth of tactics at our disposal. These activities include passive listening, think analytics review, on-site surveys, things like that, and active listening, think focus groups, live moderated usability tests, and journey mapping workshops. We frequently work with partners and users to develop journey maps so that we understand how people perform tasks or find content. This helps us make informed decisions on where content should be placed on the site and how to build it. If the core team is not sure what to decide, oftentimes an A/B test can help them make that decision for you. Atten's strategy and project management teams are well versed in all of these ways to engage your users. If you'd like to learn more about this, please do let us know.
So from there, let's review some tactics on how to inform your stakeholders. There are a multitude of projects where some stakeholders only require being informed throughout the entirety of the project. They will not have a hand in influencing the project. It is here, depending on your users, that you should aim to meet them where they are. Because informing is a style of push communication, you're pushing it out to them rather than gathering input. You should provide information to them quickly with little to no effort on their end in order to provide them with the information around what is happening. Some of the tactics you could use to inform users on your project include, but are certainly not limited to, creating an alert on your site, letting users know there is a new site in the works or a target launch date for when they can expect to see a change. Develop and provide the teams with technical documentation around the functionality of site. What do certain aspects of the site do? How should they work? And what should they not do? If you have an extra large stakeholder group, create a monthly email blast with the latest project status, or even have a dedicated landing page with the current initiative. All of those could be helpful. Obviously, the goal is to make sure the intended recipient feels like they were involved in the right way at the right levels. Is your project made up of community stakeholders? Hold a town hall meeting outlining all of the important factors of the project. What is the core problem? How is it being addressed? And what can be expected moving forward? Informing stakeholders is a key part of the process, and by providing information through a multitude of avenues, it's safe to assume that your users will be prepared, not surprised, when a new site launches. Send it over to Sally to take us home.
Okay, so now you're equipped to identify first who your stakeholders are and what their interest in your project might be, when to engage them, and third, finally, an exhaustive list of push and pull tactics to keep them informed and engaged. We would love now to do a few minutes of Q&A or storytelling. Let us know if you have a question for our team on how we handle stakeholder management or could help you handle your current stakeholder management issues, or share your wins. Was there a tactic or an idea that we didn't cover that you have executed and found successful on your projects? This is the moment to ask us anything you like or share anything you want. Please use the Q&A feature and Joe will moderate for us. Thanks so much.
I've got, this is actually a great question. I'm afraid of too many cooks in the kitchen, slowing us down. Committee think. How many are too many stakeholders?
All right, well, I can field this one off the bat. I don't think that there are too many stakeholders. Short answer, there are never too many stakeholders. The challenge and the opportunity is building consensus. If you need to have an exhaustive amount of stakeholders, whether people just need to be informed or people want to participate and have their voices heard, if they are a primary or even a secondary audience, I think that they deserve a spot on your list. The challenge, like I said, is going to be having a project management plan that engages them appropriately when it will be the least disruptive moment. Janice or Casey, anything to add there?
Nothing else to add.
I'd agree.
Okay, well, I have a question. You know what? I'm gonna interject with my own question. This is a MC's privilege. I used to be a project manager, and on my first major project, we were in the design phase and showing the design to leadership for the first time. And we had just finished the mock-ups. We had just gotten the mock-ups approved by the core team. The core team was really proud of the work that we had collaborated on. We showed it to leadership, and leadership just pulled the pin on a grenade and threw it right into the middle of the design, sent us right back to formula. What did I do wrong?
Well, first, I'm sorry that that happened to you and your project. It sounds like you haven't forgotten it, so that was really traumatizing. I have ideas on what we could have done differently in that moment, Joe. If Casey or Janice, you'd like to take that, Janice, why don't you go ahead and help Joe with some Monday morning quarterbacking?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just important to make sure the goal of project managers is to engage everyone throughout, and obviously you'll get situations where that's not the case. But I think, you know, field their questions, gather that information, make sure that they feel heard. I think that that's the important thing. And then pivot at that point. If you need to modify, make adjustments, do so in that moment. Or if you need to combat what their thoughts are, do that as well. But I think the most important part of that is always make sure, whether it's first or late stage, or even at the very end, right across the finish line, that everyone feels as though that they have a voice. And really hear them, listen to them, acknowledge what they're saying, and then determine what your next steps are from there.
Yeah. The only thing that I might add as far as ideas go is, if this person was a powerful influence, that maybe your partners over at the client should have talked to this person at the outset of the project and asked them if they had any specific vision to get ahead of that person derailing your project. That might have helped. So if somebody is going to be informed, or just FYI down the line, make sure that that FYI really is just an FYI. But if that person has the risk or the potential to completely derail your project, try to at least talk to that person ahead of time, as early as you can, to see if there are some expectations that they have. My other suggestion is for project managers to always build in buffer time where possible. This is like, you know, the wishful PM always has a good amount of buffer time at the end to handle zigging and zagging. We know that it doesn't always come to fruition, but as much as you can, maybe zig and zag in that moment. Is it just front end visual design feedback, but you can still proceed with back end site development? If so, can you parallel path design revisions without affecting your timeline? That might be a possibility as well. But the key is to just either prepare and do a risk assessment, or in the process, get creative.
I really wish I had this project management team available to me back in those days. The next question is, how should I respond if the project team doesn't want to gather outside input? What if, like, the people I'm working with don't, you know, we're in client services, and maybe on the client side, the project team's not interested in engaging stakeholders. How do you manage that?
That's a good one. Casey, what do you think?
The project team on the account, on the client side?
Yeah, so we're saying, as a client services company, we're concerned about your stakeholders, making sure that they're being heard. And on the client side, or, like, you know, even if it's not a client vendor relationship, what if the project team, other people on the project team, just don't want outside input? They just see it as a nuisance.
Yeah, that can be tough. I would touch on something that Janice covered in informing, in her slide on informing, is maybe there's an FYI on updates to the larger group that you're sending out on, you know, a lesser recurring basis than you're meeting with the core team. So maybe it's an email that's sent out once a month to the larger team, and so they have that information if they want to refer back to it. You're not kind of bombarding their emails with the constant and daily updates. They have something to look back to if they want, or, you know, building a landing page that's only visible once you're logged in, where you can add the status updates and things like that. I would shy away from thinking, well, they don't want this information, so I'm not going to give it to them. Just give it to them so they have it and they can refer back to it. And so you're kind of covering your bases there.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great answer. And yes, everybody, whether you make an assumption that they want to be informed, like, there's no harm in keeping people in the know. If the problem is a reticence to involve stakeholders because they think that they're going to be a detractor or slow you down, I would gently remind your client partners about the risks of doing that and building something that won't be adopted because people were not involved. And so that would be my only other suggestion on this is, again, maybe to build in a listening period post-launch, and maybe talk to your clients and prepare some budget for post-launch changes if the launch doesn't go over well because people weren't involved.
That is absolutely true. I want to talk about this all day, but there's a great question that came in just about tough conversation. How can I break it to my managers and staff that they will not get all of the features that they want in the website upgrade, right? You have multiple stakeholders have multiple wish lists. Not everything's going to make it in. It's not strategically important for the project. Maybe the budget doesn't fit. How do you manage that tough conversation?
Sure, I can start this and then I would ask Janice and Casey to follow up with any other commentary that I may overlook. So Atten has a couple of tactics for doing this. Number one is a thoughtful stakeholder engagement plan. You want to gather as much input as possible, and you should prepare your core team to know that website development can be as focused or as robust and as large as you want. The universe of things is available to you, but that doesn't mean that you can afford it or that everything is feasible within your project timeline. And so Atten has a couple of tactics to get ahead of this. We inform clients immediately in the sales process, again, in the project kickoff process and through the strategy phase, that we are not probably going to be able to deliver everything that everyone wants. And so we align on project goals and KPIs. We identify our primary and secondary audience groups and stakeholder groups so that we can then put those wish lists up against those things, and we can qualify features and disqualify features if they seem low priority, low business need, or coming from an edge case or a low information group. As far as breaking the news to them, we use a backlog builder exercise to help inform that process with authenticity, and it takes the emotion out of it. We use data points to basically tell the clients what they can and cannot have in that process. And what we do is once we go through strategy and design, we'll build a backlog, a robust product backlog, as every website owner should have. And based on the available budget, and we've sized that backlog, we can tell them that 60, 75% of this backlog will fit into your budget if we do not iterate along the way. So they have right there data points. It's not emotional. It's not anything that we want to do, but we let the data talk for us to say, your website is an ongoing, living, breathing thing. And if the website launch is really just the end of the beginning of your website. And so your day one website does not need to be your day 30 or your day 60 website. So 60%, 70% of this list is going to be their day one. And as any good partner should have, you should plan to iterate and add features based on ongoing listening and business needs. And so the rest of those features might be included in a post-launch sprint scheme. In the web world, project phase 2 should be a reality. I know that was a long answer. I hope it answered your questions. Casey or Janice, did I miss anything?
The only other thing I was going to quickly add, sorry, Janice, was that part of that backlog building exercise is you will visually see each line that it takes, each task that we have to get to launch, but we also have to remember to factor in QA time and accessibility review time and things like that.
I think the only thing that I would add is sometimes you run into an instance where you've obviously communicated all of these things. We at Atten have our process, and you still get a stakeholder. It's like, but I really want this. And so there's always an opportunity to say, go back to the entire core team and really evaluate what is a nice to have versus a need to have. At times get these stakeholders who are higher up, who have a little bit more weight. Maybe it's a project sponsor, maybe it's somebody who really, is championing this new site or a new feature. So I would add to that, always remain, be willing to listen to them, going back to just communication, remain flexible, and really make sure that if there is a way to get it done, that you're trying to be a voice and trying to be kind of that champion for your client on the internal side.
Yeah, these are all great answers. They're really much more detailed than I can give. My general answer is when you have a hard conversation before the decision's been made. right? Because if you're having a hard conversation at 98% budget, that's a disaster. If you're having a hard conversation before the contract is signed, that's a negotiation. And so that's basically where that's the only thing I would add to all of the incredible advice I had that has just been shared. So schedule management is resource and schedule management. Schedule management is tough. Is it typically a problem if I miss a toll gate and get someone's feedback late? So you've reached out to the stakeholders, they've asked for some feedback, somebody hasn't responded, now somebody critical hasn't responded in time, and now you've missed the deadline. Is that a problem?
Janice, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I would just say, what is their role in terms of whatever RACI chart you might have put together? Obviously, if you've requested their feedback and it sounds like they're of importance, that could be an issue. If you knew you need their final buy-in on design before you can start moving that into front-end theming, that's obviously a problem. You don't want to get we really want the entire layout to be entirely different than what you have here, where your dev has already started on front end work. So I think my response to that as a project manager would be, what is the risk in delaying it 1 or 2 more days to make sure we have that feedback, versus what is the risk of not having that feedback and moving it into development? And some of the ways that I might go about that: follow-up email, probably another follow-up email. And quite honestly, if they have mentioned that they don't want this to move forward without their stamp of approval, then I'm calling them on their phone and figuring out, okay, what can we do? Do we need to set up a meeting? Can I maybe put you on a call with our designer so that we can review the designs, and maybe we can make some live edits so that we can get your final approval? Just really weighing the risk of what it looks like moving into the next phase, and then going from there.
Awesome. Okay, great. This is all great. I want to do a callback to what Sally mentioned earlier with the stakeholder survey, which is pay attention to who's responding and who's taking a long time to respond. Because if you do a stakeholder survey at the beginning of the engagement, you'll find the people who are like either frazzled or just disinterested, and the people that you're gonna have to chase down on the project. It's just another way of getting ahead of that kind of missing a toll gate and getting feedback. Our team lead says they only want to review and approve the site when it's done and ready. I know this is a bad idea. How can I convince them to get involved sooner? That's a great question.
That is a great question. So that to me tells me a couple of things. So first of all, that if somebody wants to see a website that is done instead of in progress, it kind of shows me off the bat that they may be a low information stakeholder. And so that person may be a risk of, like Joe alluded to earlier, coming in too late and blowing up everything and not understanding the repercussions of blowing up everything. So that team lead right there, if they want to see it done, I would talk to them and gently, without, gently and kindly and just assessing their level of savviness. I would ask them I would walk them through the process, and I would walk them through how we build a site and how we build, especially for what we do, where we build WordPress and Drupal sites primarily, we build in pieces, not the whole. It's not like old school HTML where you just built the entire page. We build in components. And so sometimes it's important, and the fact that we're working in CMSs affords us the opportunity to see discrete parts and pieces of the whole as it's built, and it allows us to iterate on those parts and pieces before seeing the whole. So I would explain to that person what your workflow process is and why it's advantageous for them to see pieces instead of waiting for the whole. I would appeal to their business sense and talk to them about the risk of sunk costs and rework at the end of the project, and talk to them about why it's in their best interest to be involved sooner. And then gauge what the underlying problem is. Is it a capacity issue? Is it that they're going on sabbatical or break, or that they've just got too many meetings? Well, how can we lessen the load but still include them? Can we pre-schedule meetings if their calendar is just too hard to get on and that's why they just want to wait? Or is it that they just think that they're a rubber stamp? I would gut check with the rest of your core team if that rubber stamp is true, or if this person historically on other projects has provided feedback that has derailed the project late. I would use the people that know this person well to understand the level of risk in involving this person late. And if there is a tremendous amount of risk or an uncomfortable amount of risk, I would use the tactics that I just explained about workflow and appealing to their business needs and business sense to try and change their mind.
That's
And the-
fantastic. Is there more? I want to make sure everybody gets a chance.
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to add, I was going to touch on the meetings like Sally did as well. And maybe it's a good idea on your project plan that you likely have for as a visual for the whole team to add a column of who the attendees should be for each review phase or feedback needed kind of thing, so that they're following along there as well.
Awesome. I'm going to use another point of privilege here. There's a question that came in that's, I think, relevant to the what we're just discussing. When someone is critical in signing off on part of these projects, where might that person or persons fit into your RACI chart? Final approval of parts of the whole project is a recurring theme in this conversation, and this seems to be above the chart. How do you note that?
Janice, how about you take this one?
Yeah, so I guess if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat or something, clarifying final project in terms of the whole entirety at the end, or final in terms of deliverables. I think that's the only thing I'm a little concerned on, or quite confused. There's the word. I think, there's always, we have these artifacts and there's predefined structure that we as project managers like to be like, yes, it's great and it's already defined and we can fill it in. But there's always the opportunity to be flexible. I think if there are specific call outs for your project where somebody is critical, we can't move forward, make a line item for that, make a visual, make sure that everyone is on the same page. Maybe your first deliverable is a wireframe and Joe needs to be the one to sign off on it before we can actually move into design. Great, then highlight the team who is responsible for reviewing, is it comms, is it marketing? And then add an additional light item that says, we can't move forward without Joe. This person is critical. Define those parameters for yourself and for your team. And by including it in the artifacts that you're providing to your team, you can make sure that everyone is aligned. There aren't any questions if you're updating it in real time or if maybe something changes. But for my RACI charts, for example, I am crossing off the deliverables as we are completing them. And that cross off means that I have completed that portion. The people who are responsible, accountable, consulted, informed have been. So if there's an additional person who's critical, adding that line item and saying, don't move forward without this person's approval, indicate that on your project plan or your RACI chart, and then cross it off as you move forward.
Fantastic. Okay, so I've got a question. How do you handle, this is a question about stakeholders that are just not organized. So how do you handle having stakeholders that aren't very organized and that they're using a design vendor that's also not organized, and it's causing front-end developers to redevelop items previously approved? So this seems like a very specific use case where you have a disorganized stakeholder group and you have two different teams that are trying to respond to that.
Yeah, that's a good one and a tough one. I would say I lean towards process and maybe spreadsheets, which everyone might not lean towards, but you have a couple ideas. You have a task list where you are listing out everything. If we are talking design phase or the front end phase, if it is within development already, you have that MVP backlog list. So add a column where it says approved or in progress or under review or things like that, so that everyone has visibility into the current status of each line item. Also try and get verbal approval on certain calls. So walk through very specific items about the design or about the development up to this point and ask if these are reviewed. Again, jumping back to if this is mentioning in development, you have JIRA tickets or ServiceNow tickets where you can assign it to the client to sign off and get their approval and then move it to done. I'm a visual person, so I'd like to see that done or that green line item knowing that it's approved. And then, after these conversations or after these tickets have moved through the workflow, in your weekly status report or whatever the recurring basis is for your status reports, have a section that says decisions made and call that out, make that its own line item to make sure that, after everyone is recapping with the status report, they're seeing what's been approved recently. Make it as visual as possible. Make sure that you're getting their buy-in and their sign off so that if it does come down the line where they want to rework something, they're aware of how this will impact the project plan and the hours remaining.
Awesome. Okay, this is something that sounds really familiar to me. I've had this problem as a project manager. Our team has a really hard time agreeing on things. How do we handle this?
So I'll jump in on this one. PMP guidance gives all sorts of options for decision making. There's a bunch of different ways you could go about this. Number one, team consensus. You have majority rules, you have influencer rules, you have fist of 5, thumbs up, thumbs down. There's all sorts of different tactics for group decision making. You can do that. You could also designate, refer to your RACI chart and see of the group who's responsible for the particular thing that you all are debating. You can also use project goals, right? Like, is it in or out because it meets a project goal or business need? There are other ways that you can break the tie or lean the group toward one option or another. Compromise usually means that nobody gets what they want. So I would avoid compromise and just understand that sometimes people win and some people lose. But it's all about good stakeholder conversation and meeting management to be able to facilitate a productive dialogue that also brings the team not only to a consensus, but also even if there are people in the group that aren't getting their way or getting their thing, that they are willing to support the decision that you've made. So that's productive team management right there, is saying not everybody can have everything they want. So we need to make a decision. How are we going to get there? Majority rules, fist of 5, delegate a decision maker, use your RACI chart, use your project plan, use your project. You could even use your project plan. If there are multiple ways to do one thing and one thing's going to be on schedule or on budget and the other thing isn't, you could also do a plan for short-term and long-term solutions, right? All of these things are just creative project management, creative solution finding. But you have to make sure that at the end of the conversation that everybody feels good about the conversation that you just had and the decision that was made, even if they didn't get what they want.
Awesome. I've got 2 accessibility questions back to back. So I'm going to do them both at the same time. First, how do I know if my site is mandated by WCAG, the accessibility standard? And second is, how do we engage outside users for accessibility testing?
All right.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Why
Steph.
don't Janice and Casey, you field this one because this is an awesome one.
Yeah, I would go ahead and start in terms of requirements. From an organizational standpoint, I'm not quite sure how you would know, but I could say that it's safe to assume that somewhere there, a user who has different abilities may or may not be able to access your site. So if accessibility is something you want to strive for, get at us, just because that is something that is important regardless of whether you are mandated to be accessible or not. And then I think, Joe, would you actually mind repeating the second part of the question?
Oh, sure. So how do I engage outside users for accessibility testing? So
Yeah.
How do I know if it's accessible?
Yeah, so there's a lot of really great options. I'm fortunate right now to be working on a couple projects that have accessibility teams within their organization. But in terms of outside organizations, there are a lot of different avenues. We are currently working with the Blind Institute of Technology, and they have a great process for helping support. They have real visually impaired users or screen reader users who go through our sites, and we are actually able to partner with them to determine if a site is accessible or not. And I think our accessibility expert, Michaela, would probably have a multitude of ideas of how we could engage outside users. But those are the couple examples that I have. And if you would like to learn more, we'd obviously love to chat with you about it.
Awesome. That's fantastic. I think this is the last question I have queued up. So if anybody has any more questions, let's hit us up in the Q&A, and we're here till the top of the hour. What's the best way to engage a stakeholder who is a main decision maker who isn't providing input? And similarly, if you're updating your main contact on a regular basis and they are not disseminating the information properly, what other avenues do you take? So this is a great question in the sense that, like, how do you engage a stakeholder who's a decision maker but not providing input? Or how do you engage the stakeholder as a decision maker, but there's a gatekeeper between you and them?
I'm going to jump in on this, and Casey, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. The second part of your question was around entrusting someone on your team to disseminate information on your behalf and make sure that stakeholders are informed, but they're not doing it. That's a really tricky problem to have, and it's actually something that has happened on our projects. You have to handle that with grace, because you also don't want to usurp, go around, or go above your primary client. That can put your relationship with that client in jeopardy. I would have again, understanding your project management plan up front and aligning with your project management counterpart at the beginning of the project to understand, hey, we use tools like Basecamp and Google Docs and all of these other, Jira tickets to disseminate information to stakeholders. I would like to invite all of the people who need to be informed into these tools so that I can be assured that everybody understands what is going on with the project. Your counterpart may want to put their own spin or language on it before disseminating it to their peers and their colleagues. And that's fine, as long as you can maybe have access to it or trust it or get copied on it or have confirmation that those periodic updates have been sent. The worst thing in the world is to find out later that your counterpart is not telling people where the project is. And then someone comes in late in the game and says, I don't know what's going on with this. And I see that more than half the budget is gone and I have no idea what's going on with this project. That's a problem. I would have a very transparent but professional one-on-one with my counterpart to explain why this is important and how to get ahead of these things, and that you're willing to help disseminate information on their behalf to be included on their email blast or their emails that they're sending to those counterparts. But those are real risks that you have to get ahead of, and that's through relationship building and trust with your primary point of contact, and that you are aligned on how that information is getting to the right people if you yourself are not delivering it, and trusting that it's happening, and maybe getting a sign off or having them forward it to you after it's been sent. It's not micromanagement. It's just something that you want to check off on as part of your stakeholder engagement plan. And so I hope that addresses that question and gives you some ideas there. The first part of the question was how to engage an important person who's not providing feedback. I'm going to hand that over to my partner in crime, Ms. Minner.
How to engage a partner that's not providing feedback, correct?
It is critical.
I feel like we're on a Family Feud. Yeah, let's see. That's also a tough one. There's a lot of soft skills, I think, that come into that one, like Sally sort of touched on before. I think maybe there's a separate call, maybe there's a monthly call that you have with this other team lead where you're getting updates and informing them of updates and things like that, and getting their sign-offs if they don't have the availability to keep up with the cadence of the weekly meetings. Maybe it is just a separate email where you're, if they're too busy to meet you in the tools too, Atten's willing to meet our team wherever they work best as well. So Maybe it's a separate email that, so that you're not logging into Basecamp every time or something like that. While it's more beneficial and efficient to have everyone in our suite of tools, you know, we want to make sure that these people are getting the information and seeing the information that we need them to approve or review. I don't know, those are some initial thoughts. Janice, anything else to add there?
No, I like the idea of trying to have a monthly call. I think that that's pretty spot on. Obviously, typically the critical people are oftentimes the busiest, and having an established time frame to be able to say, here's what we're doing, here's exactly what I need from you. And then obviously on the PM side, making sure that you're equipped going into that call, you have everything ready, just, hey, feedback, yes, no, is this approved with edits, you know, really trying to get ahead of maybe not needing them in smaller increments until your next monthly check-in or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Oh, this is, I mean, it's really fantastic. I mean, I was just, the entire time as the two of you were talking, I was just thinking about faculties at universities and researchers and leadership people that can be really hard to track down. And they're always very opinionated about where they're going, because that's their role. That's what they gravitate toward. Anyway, I'm so excited that a bunch of other project managers also see that it's very common, very common on projects to have more ideas than alignment, and that you really want to have more alignment than ideas at some point. And that it's essentially, this is a fantastic team, and I love the input that all of you have. Thank you, Sally, Casey, Janice, and thank you all for joining us today.